Good morning. We're going to do some stories today about turkeys and chickens. First one is called Turkeys. Something about my mother attracts ornithologists. It's all started some time ago when a couple of them discovered she had a rare species of woodpecker coming to her bird feeder. They came in the house and sat around the window, exclaiming and taking pictures with big fancy cameras. But long after the red-cocked woodpeckers had gone to roost, the ornithologists were still there. There always seemed to be 3 or 4 of them wandering around our place and staying for supper. In those days, during the 1950s, the big concern of ornithologists in our area was the wild turkey. They were rare and pure-strained wild turkeys had begun to inbreed with farmers' domestic stock. The species was being degraded. It was extinction by dilution. And to the ornithologist, it was just as tragic as the more dramatic demise of the passenger pigeon or the Carolina parakeet. One ornithologist had devised a formula to compute the ratio of domestic to purebred strain wild turkeys in an individual bird by comparing the angle of flight at takeoff and the rate of acceleration. And in those days, the turkeys were all flying low and slow. It was during that time, the spring when I was 6 years old, that I caught the measles. I had a high fever and my mother was worried about me. She kept the house quiet and dark and crept around silently, trying different methods of cooling me down. Even the ornithologist stayed away, but not out of fear of the measles or respect for a household with sickness. The fact was, they had discovered a wild turkey nest. According to the formula, the hen was pure strain wild turkey, not a taint of the sluggish domestic bird in her blood. And the ornithologists were camping in the woods, protecting her nest from predators and taking lots of pictures. One night our phone rang. It was the ornithologist. "Does your little girl still have the measles?" he asked. "Yes," said my mother. "She's quite sick. Her temperature is 102. "I'll be right over," said the ornithologist. In 5 minutes, the whole carload of them arrived. They marched solemnly into the house carrying a cardboard box. 102, did you say? Where is she?" they asked. They crept into my room and set a box down on the bed. I was barely conscious, and when I opened my eyes, their worried faces hovering over me seemed to float out of the darkness like a giant glowing egg. They snatched the covers off me and felt me all over, and they consulted in whispers. "Feels just right," I'd say. 102? Can't miss if we tuck them up close and she lies still. I closed my eyes then, and after a while the ornithologist drifted away, their pale faces bobbing up and down on a black wave of fever. The next morning, I was feeling better, for the first time in days that I could think. The memory of the ornithologist, with their whispered voices, was like a dream from another life. But when I pulled down the covers, there, staring up at me with googly eyes and wide mouths, were 16 fuzzy baby turkeys, and the cracked chips and caps of 16 brown, speckled eggs. I was a sensible child. I gently stretched myself out. The eggshells cracked, and the turkey babies fluttered and cheeped and snuggled against me. I laid my aching head back on the pillow and I closed my eyes. "The ornithologists," I whispered. "The ornithologists have been here." It seems the turkey hen had been so disturbed by the elaborate protective measures that had been undertaken on her behalf that she had abandoned her nest on the night the eggs were due to hatch. It was a cold night, and the ornithologists, not having an incubator in hand, used their heads and came up with the next best thing. The baby turkeys and I gained our strength together. When I was finally able to get out of bed and feebly creep around the house, the turkeys peeped and cheeped around my ankles, scrambling to keep up with me and tripping over their own big spraddle-toed big feet. When I went outside for the first time, the turkeys tumbled after me down the steps and scratched around in the yard while I sat in the sun. Finally, in late summer, the day came when they were ready to fly for the first time as adult birds. The ornithologists gathered. I ran down the hill and the turkeys ran too. Then, one by one, they took off. They flew high and fast, and the ornithologists made V signs with their thumbs and forefingers, measuring angles. They consulted their stopwatches and they paced off distances. They scribbled in their tiny notebooks. And finally, they looked at each other and they sighed, and they smiled, and they jumped up and down and hugged each other. 100% wild turkeys, they said. Nearly 40 years have passed since then. Now there's a vaccine for measles, and the woods where I live are full of pure wild turkeys. I like to think they are all descendants of the 16 birds I saved from the vigilance of the ornithologists. And that's our turkey story. Next, we have a story called The Woman Who Took Chickens Under Her Wing. Minnie Bloomfield never lost her enthusiasm. She believed that with age came courage, vision, and a true appreciation of life, all life. That's why at the age of 86, Minnie became the sole caretaker of a flock of chickens abandoned alongside one of Southern California's busiest freeways after a poultry truck mishap. For reasons known only to the bureaucracy of the day, the chickens were never rescued. Instead, they simply took up residence in the roadside brush, becoming known to the locals as the Hollywood Freeway Chickens. Like many seniors, Minnie lived alone and survived on a meager pension. But to her, life was precious and not to be callously surrendered or ignored, not even the lives of slaughter-bound livestock. Minnie simply saw creatures in need and, without hesitation, stepped right into action. For 9 years, while others sped past unaware and unconcerned, Minnie made 2 pilgrimages a day to provide food and water for the abandoned chickens, using what little money she had available. As the years passed, she worried about the day when she would no longer be able to care for her adopted flock. Who would look after these poor helpless creatures if she could no longer make the journey? At 95, just when the cruelties of time began to ravage Minnie's body, a heroine appeared. Jody Mann, a young actress and a founding member of the organization Actors and Others for Animals, was Minnie's neighbor. Jody had observed Minnie on her sojourns and noticed that the older woman also fed many of the homeless cats in the neighborhood. Jody approached Minnie to see if her neighbor could identify the owner of a stray dog that Jody had recently rescued. A quick and lasting friendship resulted. Learning of Minnie's concern for the fate of her flock, Jody vowed to fight City Hall and find the chickens a new home. Jody located a ranch where the chickens would be able to live out their natural lives, and she organized a rescue party to capture the birds. This was a daunting task that tested Jody's patience and determination and Minnie's will to live. As the chickens settled into their new home, Minnie was forced to relocate to a convalescent hospital after a series of debilitating strokes. Jody maintained a close and a loving relationship with Minnie, visiting her often. She found a good home for Minnie's cat, Blackie, and she made sure that the stray cats that had come to depend on the older woman's kindness were still provided for. Later, as president of Actors and Other Animals, I was honored to present Minnie Bloomfield, then 96 years old, with our organization's inaugural Humanitarian Award, inspired by the aptly named Many. The award is dedicated. It is a delicate bronze sculpture of a graceful straw-hatted woman with robust chickens standing sentry at her feet, and a dozing cat nestled safely in her arms. To all of us in attendance that day, the bizarre plight of the cast-off chickens superimposed with Minnie's undaunted spirit was awe-inspiring. Many were moved to tears by the soft heart of this frail but determined woman, who, with tears streaming down her own paralyzed face, managed to whisper, "Thank you." Minnie is gone now, but her concern for her fellow creatures lives on in the world and in the award that bears her name and likeness. Her courage and selfless example continue to be a source of inspiration and strength for me, for Jody, and for everyone within our organization as we continue our work of caring for all living creatures who share our planet, our homes, and our hearts. Well, thank you. Those are two very sweet stories. And as we here at the Carrington approach the lifting of some of the restrictions, I want us all to remember that our obligation is to always obey the rules, wear masks, to help yourself, and mostly to prevent giving anything to anyone else, so you're helping your neighbors, and to try and find some happiness every day and be safe. Thank you again. Goodbye.